All right, welcome back. Now let's continue our coverage, of course, focusing on today being Human Rights Day. We now talk to Professor Somadoda Fikeni. He's a political analyst, and he joins me now live from SABC studios in Pretoria. Prof, good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on SA Today. And the question that we're asking our viewers is, 25 years later, what does Human Rights Day mean to them? And what does it mean to you?
Human Rights Day is a reminder first of what happened on this infamous day in 1960, which to me I think was a defining moment in South African history. It changed the course of events. It forced the government to crack down more than it was already doing, forced the organization into banishment and some leaders into prison and exile. That defined an epoch in itself. But you move forward into this day. Human Rights Day is a time for us to reflect on what has gone well and what has not gone well, and the areas where we seem to be regressing. And as it stands today, it looks like we've done well in terms of putting the infrastructure of democracy in place. All the different institutions, whether it's the Constitution, the Constitutional Court, Chapter 9 institutions, and so forth. We've done well in terms of providing social security, which in comparative terms is on a higher scale than most of your post-independent countries, that we have 17.5 million people receiving social grant. But what we have not done is to fundamentally change the apartheid geography. The colonial and apartheid legacy is still within us, and that to some degree has been due to poor policy choices and also corruption or patronage.
Your overall impression of the President's speech, I hear you talking about what we have done well and what we have not done well as the country. Listening to the President, one could tell that this is a very sensitive period of the elections, and we were indeed expecting him to talk about the achievements that the government has.
Certainly, without any doubt, ANC in nowadays find itself on the back foot, where they have to remind us of some of the gains, which are quite obvious and there, which they have made. But unfortunately, there is a period in the recent years when there seemed to be regression in many spheres, because patronage and neo-patrimonial system of looting seem to have gained an upper hand, and also there seemed to have been a social distance between those in government or those in leadership and the rest. And to that degree, I do think that ANC has to be honest about the shortcomings, but at the same time acknowledge, just like the opponents who come and say there is nothing that has happened since 1994. That can't be true when you look around and many other things that have happened.
Now, the President, with his speech earlier today, there is no doubt that he tried to sort of put a unifying message across. But the reality, Prof, is more still needs to be done in terms of championing the basic human rights of individuals.
Certainly, both individual human rights and group human rights. Remember that colonialism and apartheid tended to group people, and they were subjected to certain structural conditions as groups, as communities. So it becomes very difficult at times to individualize those rights without first dealing with the historical burden itself, because if we individualize those rights, then those with privilege will always come first. And to that degree, I do think that South Africa and South African leaders have a dilemma, one of trying to strive for a united, non-racial society, but at the same time having to address those uncomfortable issues of disparity which are created by the legacy issues and recently by some of the missteps that we've taken.
And unfortunately, here we are, a Prof, celebrating or rather observing Human Rights Day without the lights. The President earlier on called on all South Africans to join hands and to work together to end this particular energy crisis. Your take on that?
Well, what else could he have said, because the issue of the power source and the reliability of Eskom supply of power or load shedding is one main critical issue today, which may threaten the very promise of economic growth, the very promise of job creation, which brings some decency and humanize people who otherwise have been dehumanized. If you do not have reliable energy supply, then the investments do not work as they should, and small businesses and some big businesses may close, and that may lead to some more retrenchment. However, at the stage where we are, problems are too complex for the ordinary citizens and sector leaders to step back and say we will leave it to government. What we need to resolve most of the problems is all different sectors putting their shoulder on the wagon and thinking about trade-offs instead of saying government will do it.
And of course, we have some people questioning the timing of these blackouts and load shedding that we are experiencing, saying that this may impact hugely on the ANC for the upcoming election.
There is no doubt that the issue of blackouts will be one inconvenience, especially in your major urban areas, that will impact negatively on the ANC unless they will have done something magical as a government at this moment. And you look at the court cases by the city of Cape Town, which is trying to provide or to force government into allowing cities to get their independent sources, that actually raise other issues about privatization through legislation or legal demands, especially when you do have these kinds of weaknesses within Eskom. But the timing itself is rather curious in a sense, and it lends itself to the question of why all of a sudden you do have these blackouts now, which have not been there. Could they be triggered by the very promise of dismantling Eskom? Or could it be a fight back for the leaders who left before, who are now accused of having run down Eskom? Or could it be other sinister forces who want to use this moment to influence the outcome of elections? Or is it a combination of all these things cumulatively over the years, corruption, bringing the entity down to a point where we're beginning to feel the brunt of it?
Now, going back to today's events, we saw the PAC being part of the commemorations today, and we know, of course, that in the past years, the PAC had always complained that the ANC hijacks the day, but today was a little different for the political parties together, working together.
I do think that our democracy, and particularly the ruling party, is reaching a stage of maturity. Because for years we've seen these events and the stage being almost monopolized by the ruling party, even when it had no reason to fear some of the former liberation organizations which have a legitimate claim to these days, such as your PAC, the Black Consciousness Movement, that they are embracing these leaders. And it is setting up a good example for the national days, because national days were meant to be a point of convergence of all different political formations, of all different sectors, to celebrate our nationhood or our striving for nationhood or common purpose. But once these look like they are over-governmentalized and there is featuring of ANC, it tends to drive other parties, and they start having their side shows on the side, and that encourages fragmentation of the society.
Yeah, that was my next question, Prof, as to will we ever see a day where political parties sort of put their differences aside and commemorate days such as today together? Because we've seen that the EFF's Julius Malema was in the Vaal as well in Sharpeville for a different remembrance event by his political party. The DA also was in Bekkersdal in Gauteng. So I suppose we're yet to see a day where they put aside all their differences and commemorate days such as the Human Rights Day together.
Election season is a silly season in terms of politics. You can't hope for anything that looks like patriotism or national common purpose. Only after that, if you have mature leadership who realize that not everything can be reduced into partisan interest, because partisan interest is not the same thing as national interest. We need to come together given the scale of challenges that we face, where there is a clearly identified national interest, a national compact, and a recognition of our common destiny. Once we have done that, the government, the private sector, the civil society, the different political formations, women organizations, youth, and so forth, then you will begin to see us approximating what has been promised in the preamble of our Constitution, where it talks of a non-racial, just, united society which is embracing unity whilst acknowledging diversity.
All right, Prof, we have to leave it at that. But thank you so much for coming through. Professor Somadoda Fikeni is a political analyst talking to us about the importance of today and where South Africa is 25 years later, joining us live from our studios in Pretoria. We'll take a quick break here on SA Today. When we come back, it's a holiday, but we still have business news. Colin is standing by.